here at least once before, but I don't know that we've ever come close to 30,000 meals. And so I hope that you are planning now, already pointing at October 23rd, and planning on jumping in, being here that day, and helping to bag food and to support that financially. Just make your, if you're doing electronically, you can go online to our website. You can write a check if you do it that way. Just make sure that you check Team Mike. I had someone catch me in the lobby between services and say, I've got a check here for Team Mike. Where do I put this so I don't have to listen to you whine about this? And I said, right over there. Hey, listen, one of the things I love about living in Ohio is that we get to experience all of the seasons. As a matter of fact, I've got a cousin who just moved back to Ohio from Florida. He was living in Florida. He and his wife just moved back, and one of the things he said he missed about Ohio are the seasons. And I have friends who live around the world who have never experienced winter. They don't know what snow is, and then they come to the United States as adults in the winter, and it's fun to watch them interact with snow for the first time because they have no idea what to do with it. But in Ohio, we get all four seasons, right? Winter, spring, summer, and football. Yeah, man. That guy is happy because he has helped bag food for Haiti. And so if this is for the red team. Listen, if this is your first Sunday with us at MCC, my name is Mike. I'm the lead pastor here, and I just want to say I'm really glad that you're here this morning. We started this fall just a few weeks ago. We began a series that we're calling Simplify, and what we're doing this series because I'm going to bet that most of us, if not all of us, have at one time or another said something along the lines of, I just wish things could slow down a little bit. Have you ever said that? Maybe you've said that recently. And I'm not talking about a life, lived at the beach. I'm not talking about being around the fire pit all day making s'mores. I'm not talking about that kind of life. But if you have ever thought, my life is moving at a pace that I can do now, but I don't think I can sustain this for very long. If you've ever thought that, or if you have ever, worse, maybe this is even worse, you've gotten accustomed to the speed of your life, but you know that you are running too fast, and there is no way. The first week I mentioned that one of the dangers, one of the things that happens is if we're not careful, if we don't change how we live, our overcomplicated world will begin to feel frighteningly normal to us. The speed at which we travel will begin to become normal for us, and we'll try to speed other people up around us. We become accustomed to this frantic pace of life, and we can no longer differentiate between those things which are really important in our life and those things which are non-essential. We're just moving so quickly, it all just becomes a blur. And so the question is, what if your life could be different? What if what you're experiencing What if what you're experiencing right now in your life is not what God intends for you to experience? What if you have a Father who loves you so much that what he wants more than anything else for you is to enjoy and experience this life and in the process grow more like him? That's what this has been about. And so over the last couple of weeks, we've talked about things like something that we may just be overlooking, like those things that recharge us, that give us energy, that give us life, those things that we do in our life that we just enjoy. So what things we may be overlooking? We've talked about our calendar, which we may be overbooking, and making sure that we don't put too many things on the calendar. We also talked about what could be clogging our arteries, what's messing with our heart, the inability to forgive other people. And I just want to say, listen, when we talk about these things, and I said this up front, and I want to make sure as we close this out that you understand, none of this is easy. No one is saying this is easy. This is hard work to simplify your life. I'm just saying it's worth it. It's worth getting off the treadmill and running so quickly if you can slow your life down. So today what we're going to do is we're going to zoom out. We're going to take a look at the bigger picture. And the reason I wanted you to think in terms of seasons is because it's not just weather that works in seasons. Our life also has seasons. There's a passage of Scripture in the Old Testament. So if you have your Bibles, if you would turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And if you're using a Bible that looks like this one, it's page 462. And if you don't have a Bible of your own, we'd love for you to take the one that looks just like this that is somewhere near you. Or if there's not one real close to you, there's some out at the info desk, I believe. And we'd love for you just to take one of these home so that you have a Bible of your own. Now, for some of us, my guess is that even if you brought your own Bible, this is a book. You may not even be able to find this book. I mean, it's buried in the Old Testament, and maybe it's one you've not opened to very often, right? But I'm going to guess for all of us, the verses that we look at this morning are going to sound a little bit familiar. They're written by Solomon, who was the king of Israel in 10th century BC. He was known as the wealthiest, wisest, most powerful king in his day. People would travel the earth to come and listen to him speak. This book was written later in his life, and it attempts to capture what he has learned about the meaning of life and what really matters in life. So listen to what he says in chapter 3. Again, my guess is you've probably heard some of this. He writes, "There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. There's a time to be born and a time to die." And we're just going to stop right there for a moment because I want to make sure that as we begin this morning, we all recognize we all have a begin date and we have a best if used by date, right? You know what I'm talking about? We all have a date where we expire, where this life comes to an end. So just to make sure that we understand this, we all have a we're born date and we all have a we're leaving this life date. All of us have that. As a matter of fact, the reason I point that out is because I'm going to shoot for just a moment all the way to the end of the book, because Solomon spends the book talking about what is meaningful or what is meaningless in life. And then at the very end of the book, he sums it all up. And check out, this is what he says. So the last two verses of the book, this is what he says. "Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it was good or evil." And so part of what he's telling us is that when you get to the end of everything, when you just sift everything else away, when you blow all the chaff away, what is left is fear God, keep his commandments. Before your last day on this earth, before you get to your best if used by date, this is what you want to make sure that you keep in mind. One day we will stand before God and he will bring forth everything. And so this is what you're shooting for. You want to fear God and you want to keep his commandments. But between today and your last day, Solomon sheds some insight on our lives that is helpful and helps to simplify them. So check this out. We're going to go back to the beginning again so we catch it all in sequence. He says, "There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot. There's a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. There's a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them back up, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep. And then there's a time to throw things away, there's a time to tear, and there is a time to mend, a time to be silent, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace." Solomon's wisdom. Listen, you know what? Sometimes I think wisdom is just common sense spoken out loud. We all know the truth of these types of words. In our day-to-day lives, we already know there is a time to get up and a time to go to bed. There's a time to go to work or to go to school, and there's time to have fun and to play around. We know that through the seasons of the year, there's a time to cut grass, then there's a time to rake leaves, and then there's a time to shovel snow. That's exactly right, and it's coming. But what Solomon is saying, right, is bigger than that. In Solomon's view of our lives, it's not just a matter of one day after another. He says that if you want to talk about your life, if you look back at verse 1 again, he's basically, in all of this, he's saying this. Life is made up of seasons. Some of them are weeks long, some are months long, some of them are years long. And they have a beginning and they have an end, and you spend time in that season, and then you move on out of that season. Most of us in the room this morning, my guess is we've lived long enough to recognize the truth of that. We kind of have a sense of this. You may be able to look back on your younger years and recognize that your younger years were a season of your life. You may be able to look back to when you were a teenager. That was a season. Post-high school, that was a season. Just married, season. Just had children, season. Retirement, it's a season. And when Solomon talks through this, he lists a total of 28 seasons, and his words suggest that the most accurate way to gauge your life, right, to discern what season you're in, because seasons act as a subplot to this overall narrative of life, that we need to determine what season we are in. That helps us gauge our life. And the truth is, I want to make sure you catch this, the season you're in right now is not your whole life. Let me say that one more time. I just want to make sure you get it. The season you're currently in, whatever it is, it's not everything. It's not the totality of your life. It's vital to remember. It's just a season. It may be good, it may be bad, it may be easy, it may be difficult, but every season that you have in your life is temporary. So as we get started, here's what I think is important. I need to identify my current season of life. I need to know where I am right now. That's vital if you want to simplify your life, because it enables you to be fully present and engaged. It brings a single-mindedness in your clarity, in your thinking. You are more likely to notice God being involved in your life. You're more likely to learn the lessons that He has for you in this stage. You're more likely to maximize the character development, as well as the wisdom and the spiritual growth that God is wanting, these opportunities that this season has for you. It's also important to identify your current season so that when it comes to a close, you're less likely to hold on to it. You give yourself a better chance to make a graceful exit and to step wholeheartedly into the next season of your life, because there is another season that is coming, right? So here's the question. What am I learning from my current season? You might even ask it this way, because we've kind of talked about this. What season am I in, and what am I learning from this season that I'm in? What is God trying to teach me here? Because the thing for us to remember is that He's with us in every season, and He wants to teach us critical, lifelong lessons that will bring meaning to each season of our life. When your life is painful, there's purpose in that. And God will teach you that if you'll listen to His voice. There's a sense of satisfaction when life is going well and you sense that you are part of His plan. There's the sense of satisfaction that comes with that, but you can only do that when you're listening to Him. If you are a Christ follower in this place this morning, God is continually working to refine your character. His goal for your life is to help you every day become a little bit more like His Son, Jesus. And in this season of your life, He has a good lesson to teach you, especially, listen, the best lessons are the hardest ones to learn. They come in the uncomfortable time of life, restless, painful seasons of our life. And the question is, what are those lessons? Do not squander whatever it is you're going through right now, the growth that comes with the hard seasons. Learn everything that you can during all of your seasons. In every season, God wants to teach you something specific. So, which leads us right to this next one, be fully in. Whatever season you're in right now, it's important to identify it so you can jump all in. Once you name and understand it, be there. That's where you need to be. Not in your last season, not in your next season. You need to be in the season that God has you in. If you have children that are teenagers now, you may remember when they were just born. If you have children, whether they're teenagers or older, do you remember? Just think about that for a minute. You can nod your head if you would. Do you remember when they were just born? I mean, do you remember when it was all dirty diapers and runny noses, especially as we go into the fall and winter? Do you remember those times? Do you remember that thing that you used to squeeze the gunk out of their nose with? When they would get a cold and they were so little they couldn't blow their nose, and so there was this thing, it was rubber and it had a little bulb on the end and it tapered down, and you shoved it up in their nose and you gave it a big squeeze, and they hate it. And I don't know what you called that in your house. I don't know what the real name of it is. We call it a snot sucker. Kids, listen, kids hate that thing. It's part of that season, right? Part of that season of life. Sandy and I have twins. They're 26 years old now, but I distinctly remember walking out of our house. I can still see this as if it's happening. I walked out of our house. I closed the door behind me. I'm getting ready to go back to the office. I'm standing on the sidewalk in front of our house, headed to my car, and I realize as I'm standing there, hey, I'm not tired, which is a really weird thing to sort of realize. So I stood there for a moment feeling not tired, which was really kind of cool. But it was weird. And then I thought to myself, man, I wonder if I've been tired for 2 years and I just didn't know it. Because now I don't feel tired standing here. Listen, it was a season of our kids' lives. And I didn't know it at the time, but college was a season in my life. It was a season of a lot of sleepless nights due to studying and other things. I'm now in a season of life when I've been caring for my parents. Some of you who have been around for a while, you know that I lost my mom this past February. A week later, a friend lost her mom. 4 weeks later, another friend lost his mom. I was talking to a really good friend of mine this week who's in the process of losing his dad. Listen, it's a season. Different decisions, difficult decisions need to be made. More care has to be given in a totally different direction than you ever thought you would. There's this deep sadness that during this season you need to learn to embrace so that you can work through it. But it's a season. Solomon, when he talks about this, he lists the seasons in pairs, in twos. I don't know if you noticed that or not. He contrasted one season with the other. Sometimes you're in a season where it's laughing. Sometimes you're in a season when you're weeping. I'm assuming you've lived through both of those kind of times in your life, where there's a time where it's just all grins and giggles, and there's another time when it seems like the sky is always dark. There's a time to plant and a time to uproot. Farmers know those seasons well. There's a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to keep silent and a time to speak. Here's what I want to make sure you catch, because he's telling us this. Inherent in all of these contrasts is this important thing, so please don't miss this. Seasons end. New seasons begin. Seasons don't last forever. Listen, you can greatly simplify your life just by recognizing when the season you're in is coming to a close, when it's time for you to move on. If you've learned the lessons that God has for you in this particular season, or if the season that you're in, listen, it long expired and it's time for a change. There is nothing for you in this season anymore. You need to let go and move on. Don't stay there. Follow the pattern that's laid out by Solomon. When you're through with a season, for God's sake, move on. For your sake, move on. For the sake of those that are closest to you, who love you, and whose life, listen, you influence by the way you live your life. You rub off on them. For their sake, move on. I want you to notice this as well about seasons. You should never travel through those alone. Always travel with someone when you can. The Bible says so much about life being lived in relationship. That's why we talk about small groups, because we believe that small groups are a vital vehicle to your spiritual growth. So what I mean is they help you grow spiritually. So when Paul's writing to the church in Rome, he says, rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. If you are in a season of your life, what I'm saying is, if you're in a season of your life where you are rejoicing, there's something going on, and it's great, and it's awesome, and it is time to party, don't do that by yourself. Invite your friends to party with you. If you are in a season of life where something dark has happened, and there is a cloud hanging over you, and it doesn't look like the sun is going to come up again today, you were not meant to carry that burden by yourself. Do not travel your seasons alone. Proverbs 15 says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. If you've been around here long, you know that when our kids were teenagers, I had a friend that I shared that season with, and we talked about everything. I mean, we had all kinds of questions for each other, from guidelines just in general, to punishments for bad behavior, to rewards for good behavior. And here's what we wanted to do. We knew as Christ followers, we wanted to be the best dads in the world. And we knew we couldn't do it we knew we shouldn't even try to do it on our own. I have a friend who's 30 years older than I am. And I ask that friend for insight from time to time because they have 30 more years of living experience than I have. And sometimes we don't agree. I don't always do what they suggest. They're okay with me being wrong sometimes. But even when I don't follow their advice, because if that's you, if you're on that end of it, if you're the one giving advice and the person doesn't take your advice necessarily, I hope you'll hear this. Even when I don't follow his advice, I still value what he thinks. It still influences who I am and how I move forward. In Ecclesiastes 4, just a little bit later in this book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon writes this: "Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up." Verse 12 says, "Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken." Listen, share your season whenever it's possible. And I also want to include this thought too. My role in the church has seasons. So just life in general, we have seasons in our lives. Your role in the church has, there was a season of your life when you were new to following Jesus. I don't know if for some of us, we remember that real easily. It's just not been that long ago. For others of us, we've been following for decades. And so think back to when, not when you started going to church. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when you decided that Jesus was going to make a difference in how you lived your life. That because of him dying on the cross, what Adam talked about just a little bit ago, and we took communion, because of that, because he loves you so much, you decided he was going to make a difference in how you lived your life. Do you remember when you made that decision? Do you remember when you decided to live differently? There was a season. And then there was a season where you got your legs kind of up underneath you spiritually. You began to learn a little bit more, and you began to grow a little bit more. And then somebody took notice of that. And there was a time in your life when someone at school or at work or a neighbor or someone in your family said something to you like, "Hey, you go to church, right? I wanted to ask you, you pray, right? I was wondering, could you pray for me because," and you know they didn't go to church, they didn't read their Bible, but they've got this question, and so they recognized you and they said, "Hey, you know this Jesus guy, right?" I mean, so they ask you this question, or they said, "There's this thing I've been reading in the Bible that I don't really understand. Can you explain this to me?" Or someone else came to you and said, "You know what, I was kind of hoping to do this study of this book of the Bible. Would you do this Bible study with me? Would you lead this Bible study? Would you lead our small group study?" I mean, those are all seasons where you're growing. I remember when I was 33 years old, it was 33 years ago. I was 22 years old, almost 34 years ago now when I first started ministry. And in our church in Columbus, it was the beginning of a new season for those who were in leadership at that time that was very difficult for them because it was a season when they were wrapping up and transferring leadership to the next generation. And listen, that season was difficult. That season calls for people to make new decisions. If the church wants to reach the next generation, we have to make different decisions. And it takes incredible spiritual maturity to make those kind of decisions. But just like moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas make decisions that are best for the children that are growing up around them, so those who find themselves in the position in the church of being a spiritual parent or a spiritual grandma or grandpa, we have to do the same thing. The church that thrives moving forward has people who have been preparing the next generation to assume leadership, and then they do everything to be actively involved in helping them, in cheering them on, and doing whatever they can do to help them succeed. And if we want to be part of reaching the next generation, not just watching it happen, but actually be part of it, we must lay aside our preferences to do best what will help them succeed. That type of sacrifice is difficult. I also want to say it's rare to find. I have watched churches die because they will not make those decisions. I'm going to bet you know of churches that have closed their doors, locked them, and walked away because they refused to make those decisions. churches sometimes finally relent, but our lack of eagerness costs the kingdom. In the church I was with in Columbus, it was my home church. We lost a decade of people. 10 years. There was a 10-year span. No one in our church fell in that 10-year span. Not because we didn't make the right decision. We did finally. We just didn't make it when we should have. We waited too late. There was a 10-year span where nobody in that age group was part of our congregation because we waited too long. We have to decide we're not going to make that mistake here at MCC. We are going to make the decisions we need to make to continue to move smoothly through our culture to help as many people begin and build their relationship with Him. So as we think through this, listen, there's a couple next steps for everyone. And they're on your notes. Here's the first one. You need to identify the season that you're in right now. And there are questions that can help you do this. They're found, if you're using the material from Right Now Media, I think these questions may be in there or it's in the book that we've got. But here's some of the questions. What season are you in? What is God trying to teach you in this season? Are you fully engaged in this season of your life? What can you do to embrace this season, good or bad, so that you do it more wholeheartedly? What is it about what time of your life are you in right now, knowing that it has a beginning and has an end, but to be fully engaged right now? Which one are you in, and how do you more fully engage it? Here's the number 2, move on. Are you currently stuck? If you are currently stuck in a season that has expired, you're just staying in it, move on. What makes you feel this season? If you're in a season that you feel like is coming to an end, why do you think that? What's telling you? Something's telling you that it's coming to an end. What is it that's helping you understand that? But if you're resisting the need to move on, why are you doing that? Why do you want to stay here longer than you need to? What lessons did God teach you during this season, and what new season might God be opening up to you, and what steps can you take to just move into that? Listen, we have to answer those questions over and over again in our life. Our seasons begin, our seasons end. We have many of them throughout our life. We all have seasons. Our job as Christ followers is to honor God with the season that you're in right now and be able to move smoothly into the next one as best you can with Jesus by your side. Why don't we go to Him in prayer? God, thank you for what Solomon tells us. And it seems so simple sometimes when we just see the words on a page in a book. And yet you have so much meaning behind these things to help us become more like you and live our lives in such a way that not only do we grow strong, but we grow stronger in our walk with you so that we can help those around us begin that relationship, begin that walk, that journey with you. Because, God, they're going through seasons as well, and they may not understand them at all. And we now have this perspective from what your word says that helps us understand this. So help us to be wise. Help us to be generous. Help us to share with those around us what we know from our experience that can help our friends get through these seasons as well. And when we're in a season, God, help us as we walk through our seasons not to walk alone, because there'll be somewhere we want to party with our friends because of what you're doing in our lives, and there will be others where we just have to lean heavy on them. So help us to be wise about that too, that we might be wise enough to lean on others when we need to and be strong enough for others to lean on when they need to. God, thank you for not letting us walk this alone, that not only are you with us, but you've surrounded us with friends as well. We pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. There's something else that Solomon says, and he says it in chapter 3, which we were looking at. He just says it a little bit later on. He says, he has made everything beautiful in its time. He has set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to the end. So I usually share a verse about, like this one in particular, at funerals, because too many people see the end of this life as the end. And I just want to make sure you know it's not. From God's perspective, life on this planet, whether it's 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, there's a guy where my dad lives, Fred, turned 100 years old this summer. It's just a long season woven together with shorter seasons. But someday, this season, that when you look around you, this season will come to a close, and a new reality will begin. And you already know that because there's something inside of you. He's put eternity in your heart. You instinctively know there's more to it than what we see. There's something that happens beyond this, and you will be invited at the end of this when your expiration date, when the best by used by date, when all of that happens, and you stop breathing in this world, you will be invited into a new season with God that never ends. It will last forever, and you get to fully experience Him. And for those who have chosen to live their earthly seasons with Jesus, and you have found grace and forgiveness in Him, and you have walked through this life into the next with your hand in His, learning the lessons that God has had for you. You found meaning and purpose and satisfaction along the way, and then you get to experience what forever is going to be like. But I'm going to guess there are people in the room this morning, I know for sure you have friends outside of this room who have not chosen that path. To this point, they have not chosen to hold Jesus' hand in life. They are not walking beside Him. And here's what we need to remember as the church. God will not force Himself on anyone. And if you or your friend has chosen not to walk with Jesus in this world, He will not force you to walk with Him in His kingdom for eternity. There is another season for your life as well, but it involves an eternity apart from God. And He loves you so much that He would send His Son so that you wouldn't be able to miss how much He loves you. And so if you've come here this morning and you've never made a decision to follow Jesus with your life and to follow His example in the waters of baptism, today can be your day. Last week, we baptized a guy at his house in our horse trough. The church owns a horse trough. Because he's in a wheelchair, he couldn't get into our baptistry. We said, we will bring it to you. Listen, we'll do whatever we can, whatever we have to help you make your decision to follow Jesus, if you will let us do that. So listen, this next song that Jen's about to sing, the time during is for you to think through what your next step needs to be.